Welcome to the first season of The Grind, an Affable Idiots production in association with Respawning Fire, the kick-ass irreverent gaming podcast. I'm Holden DePardo, and I'm going to take you through a multi-episode look at Google Stadia. This first episode is specifically going to look at the early claims of Google Stadia and whether it matched up with what were the initial promises. Before we can get into that, I just kind of want to lay out what Google Stadia is, just to kind of keep in mind while you're watching this episode. Google Stadia is a cloud console. Just like a PlayStation, you buy games a la carte, the difference being that you can access these games instantly because you're streaming them from Google's cloud, as opposed to putting in a physical disc or buying it digitally directly from PlayStation. It also offers a Stadia Pro membership, which acts sort of like a PlayStation Plus membership, where you pay for discounts, you get free games every month, but rather than offering online services, because obviously Stadia is always online, it doesn't need to offer that, instead they position it as allowing you to play in 4K 60 frames per second HDR with 5.1 surround sound. So it's a cloud console with a pro membership. It's pretty straightforward, which kind of makes it all the more interesting why they didn't position it nearly as well as they could have in their announcement, which we'll get into. How this is going to work, I am going to play clips of the claims they made, of which there are 9 major claims, and I'm not going to be putting words in Google's mouth. I'm going to let the clips speak for themselves, and then I'm going to comment on whether or not the potential or the promise was reached. So let's jump into it.
Our vision for Stadia is simple. One place for all the ways we play. It's focused on gamers, inspired by developers, and amplified by YouTube creators. Our vision is to bring those worlds closer together, to connect game developers with players and YouTube creators in a way that only Google can.
These are really vague claims from Phil Harrison. It's hard to actually know specifically what he's talking about. Luckily, later in the event, MatPat of the YouTube channel Game Theory gets on stage as a guest host and talks about 2 specific features that I'm pretty certain Phil Harrison was referring to. It's the closest thing that meets his description, at least. So we're going to talk about both of them. Let's start with the first one.
Crowd play, for example, gives our audiences the chance to instantly jump into a game with us, and then the creator can feature them live on the stream in real time.
This feature just isn't there. There's no mention of it on any official blog post from Google on the Stadia community blog. There's just nothing about this. It's just not a thing right now. Let's go on to the next one.
Another feature that I'm incredibly excited about is State Share. Here, the possibilities are literally endless. Live streaming horror games, for instance, has been one of the most popular formats for live streaming on YouTube since its inception. But now with State Share, you can actually take this to the next level by letting the people who are just watching you replicate the exact same scenario you just played through in-game.
There is only one game that supports state sharing, and it came out in July, like several months after Stadia launched. The game's called Creta. It's a creation game, so kind of like a Dreams, but it doesn't have that kind of Sony money behind it. And it's also a beta of State Share. It's not even the full-fledged feature that we were promised during the event. So considering it's just one game that supports this feature and then no games support crowd play, I think this is a total miss on both fronts.
Imagine you are watching games on YouTube and you discover the latest Assassin's Creed Odyssey trailer on Ubisoft's official channel on YouTube. You will notice the Play Now button. By simply clicking on that button, the player is brought directly into the game in a browser in as quick as 5 seconds.
This one was really easy to test. just had to find the exact video that Phil Harrison mentions in the demonstration, which is a launch trailer for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and then specifically at the end of it, it says Ubisoft, and at the end, NA in hard brackets for the North American launch. Found the video. At the end of the video, there is no mention of Stadia. They only show the PS4 and Xbox. There's not even a play button. They just don't even mention Stadia. There's nothing in the description at all. There's also a browse game section that shows nothing about Stadia at all. So there's no mention here at all. And this was the case for every single game that I tested this with. There is no click to play button right from a launch trailer, which should have been very easy to do. Even though no other trailer I looked at featured that play button, it's quite obvious why the Assassin's Creed trailer didn't have it. It's because that trailer came out in September 2018, and that demo was from March 2019, meaning that Google clearly fabricated that demo when it should have been a very easy thing to demo. In a July 2020 Stadia event, they did actually announce Click to Play.
Now, your games are getting even more instant with Click to Play. Here's how it works. You're a Stadia Pro subscriber, you're watching your favorite YouTube creator play PUBG, and you feel like starting your own game with some friends. Just click the link they've shared in the description, and you're playing PUBG instantly on Stadia.
However, did you notice that they changed the positioning a little bit? It's not attached to a launch trailer. It's if you're watching a streamer, then you can just link to the game, but you're not joining their game, you're just getting access to buy the game the streamer is playing. Did you also notice that it's only for Stadia Pro members, which kind of takes away from that instant access? It's only instant access if you are already using Stadia. But I thought the draw was you can just see the trailer and go, oh, I want to play that, click on it, and then just jump into playing it, or jump right into the buy screen at least. But that only works for Stadia Pro members. And beyond that, they went from a play button to a link in the description, which is a huge downgrade, and a really odd one at that, because every button on every website is just a link. That's all they are. So why they would go from having the button to the hyperlink, I have no idea, but it's really weird.
A key benefit of our platform is that a single creative vision and a single code base can now be enjoyed instantly across any screen. At launch, we'll support being able to play games across desktops, laptops, TV, tablets, and phones.
This all screens stuff is tough, because you basically have to break it down into two parts. The first is just mobile devices that support. Then there's also desktops, which really means broadband, because anybody can download Chrome. At launch, Google Stadia only was supported on Pixel phones, Pixel 2 and higher specifically, which is not a large amount of phones. The Google Pixel phones have really never been huge sellers. Now, in early 2020, in the kind of early months of 2020, they started introducing new phones. So they'd introduced Samsung phones. They introduced kind of lesser known phones like the Razer phone, Asus phones, and then the slightly more popular OnePlus phones. The thing is that that's still not a lot of devices. So I went through Stat Counter, which essentially tracks through mobile browser tracking the market share of phones, and I was able to track from 2017 to 2020 the market share of all the different phones that Google Stadia supports. Now, here's an important caveat. I kind of had to fudge the numbers a little bit, and the reason is that Samsung is always featured on the market share list because they sell a lot of phones, but OnePlus, Asus, Razer are usually lumped into the other category, and there's no way for me to discern how much of the other category was those phones specifically. So I just included all of other, which means the numbers I'm about to show you are heavily inflated. This here is a chart of every region that supports Stadia and the market share of phones that are officially supported by Google. You'll notice that the highest is just under 50%, and the lowest is like the 33%, like a third of the market. So it's not really a huge penetration in each of these regions. It's not awful, but it's going to take a lot of work for that to get up higher. The good news is that on June 11th, Google opened it up so that you could basically put your phone into an experimental mode in Stadia settings and then just use Google Stadia on any phone you are willing to try it out on, except for iOS, of course. But this is kind of like a myth that you can't play it on any device you want to. Within like a month of launch, you were able to type in a very simple code, which I'll just show you right here. You type that into the URL bar on the Chrome browser on any Android phone, and then you can get Stadia working. It's no problem. Maybe some functionality won't work super great, but anyone can do this. Okay, I'm being a little facetious. No one wants to do that, nor is it a great solution, but that actually is a real code that you could use. The broadband side of things is probably the most interesting part. Effectively, Microsoft has done a lot of research into the amount of Americans that have access to broadband, and they found massive discrepancies between what data firms claim is the broadband usage in America and what kind of the U.S. government is tracking as broadband connection in America. The U.S. government says, well, the FCC says that about 25 million Americans don't have access to broadband. However, firms like Pew Research say that it could be as high as 113 million people don't use broadband. And that access versus usage is important to recognize. So by Microsoft's own estimates, they believe that there are 157 million Americans that are not using broadband Wi-Fi. Now, what this means for game streaming services, in this context, Stadia, there just might not be as many people as you would expect in America that have or use broadband Wi-Fi to use Stadia in the first place. That's a huge, huge number. Like, I was very surprised to see that. I guess I just ran into the assumption that most Americans have access and use fast-speed Wi-Fi, but it's just simply not true. And that's obviously going to hurt Stadia's likelihood of being on all screens. And I think the takeaway here is that it's just not possible for Stadia to be on all screens. And we kind of just need to let that idea go. They should strive to be on as many screens as possible. And I think they could be doing more for that.
So imagine you've just discovered that game for the first time. You're running it on the Chrome browser. And here it is on a Pixelbook running the Chrome OS. It's then easy and instantaneous to move that same game experience from exactly that moment onto the phone. See, and we can go straight onto the desktop PC. And then it's once again seamless to go from running on our PC to running on a tablet. And then finally, we then move seamlessly to the TV. And so this TV is accessed using this, which is a Chromecast Ultra HDMI streamer.
This one pretty much works as advertised. I had a video of someone testing this at launch. The download option didn't work for some reason, so I can't put it in the video, but the link's right here, so if you want to watch it, you can. But I mean, it largely works. Not quite as seamless as Google made it appear on stage. That's kind of par for the course for any announcement of anything, but it does work.
I'd like to introduce you to the newest member of the Google hardware family, the Stadia Controller.
We're about to jump into the Stadia Controller. Phil Harrison's going to lay out some features of it. I'm going to break these down one by one.
Is that it will connect through Wi-Fi directly to the game that is running in the Google data center. The Stadia Controller identifies which screen or device you want to play on and links it with your game session running in the cloud.
This was the most clever announcement at the entire event. One of those kind of like Apple, it just works kind of things. Like, oh, of course it works that way. It makes so much sense. You don't have to unpair and repair your controller to every device that you want to connect to. You can just seamlessly transition between them. And that's allowed by the Wi-Fi controller. That was a great idea. Unfortunately, it didn't quite play out super well. It was only wirelessly capable on the Chromecast Ultra, so on TV at launch. And then at the very beginning of May, so about 7 months after launch, then it finally comes to desktop. And then another roughly 2 months after that, the very, very end of June, it then came to smartphones. So effectively, one of the greatest features of Stadia just wasn't usable in the way that it was set up as, which is a huge disappointment. But wait, there's more.
And the second one is the Google Assistant button. Pressing this button allows players to immediately access the controller's built-in microphone so they can get help from the assistant for special in-game features integrated by developers. When a player is stuck on a level or puzzle and desperately wants that next beat in the story or the breathtaking views in the next level, what do? Today, they have to leave the game, fire up YouTube, find the right video, scrub to the right part of that video, and watch how it's done. With Stadia, that help will be just a button press away. Take this example from our friends at Crystal Dynamics with Rise of the Tomb Raider. When the player gets stuck on a level, like me, instead of grabbing a laptop or a phone, they just need to push the button on the Stadia controller to get help from the Google Assistant. No distractions, no need to take your eyes off the game, and no secondary devices needed.
First off, on Google Assistant helping you play your games by acting as a guide, no, it's not a thing right now. And there's a really good reason for that. For starters, Google Assistant only works for pretty standard Google Assistant features, such as like what the weather is like, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't do things like music or videos. But, and this is the important part, the Google Assistant only works on Chromecast. And that's a recent development as of June of this year. So no developer could have possibly implemented any features to support game guides and that kind of stuff because they have to assume you're playing on your TV. If you're playing on mobile, you're playing on desktop, you can't use Google Assistant. So they've really dropped the ball on this part.
And thanks to fast transfer speeds between the Stadia instances in our data center, our platform can connect instances together to dynamically expand the capabilities along with the need of your games. As a developer, you're used to being forced to tone down your creative ambition that are limited by the hardware. But our vision with Stadia is that the processing resources available will scale up to match your imagination.
And that includes taking advantage of the power of multiple GPUs at once. In this video, you can see some comparison points showing the difference between our single GPU and multiple GPUs. What you see here on the left of the line is running on a single 10.7 teraflop GPU. And on the right of the line, you can see the same content running on Stadia using multiple GPUs. In this demo, we're highlighting real-time fluid deformation. Accurate water simulation is one of the most compute-intensive effects for games. And it's a powerful example of what Stadia is capable of.
We got you. Not a chance. Not this time. It never happened. It's false. No way. Not this time. We created it. Not this time. It's fiction. Not this time. It never happened.
When Stadia launches, we will have increased performance significantly to support resolutions up to 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR and surround sound.
We couldn't be happier to be bringing Doom Eternal to Stadia and are thrilled to announce that the game will be capable of running at true 4K resolution with HDR color at an unrelenting 60 frames per second.
Doom Eternal could have benefited from those multiple GPUs because it did not hit 4K 60 frames per second when it launched. Neither did a lot of games that launched. Matter of fact, here's the thing. I couldn't test this myself because I don't have the tools to test such a thing. Also, Google doesn't tell you what the resolution's running at. It just tells you the potential. So it will say it's running at 4K when it's not really running at 4K. So I relied on Digital Foundry to test which games are running at 4K 60 frames per second. First of all, they all use the same upscaling effect that PS4 Pro and Xbox One X use to achieve 4K. So it's not true 4K like they said it was true 4K, but also a lot of these games aren't even hitting 60 frames per second. The only game that reached 4K was Tomb Raider, and even then it was at 30 frames per second. What makes this, I think, worse is that Phil Harrison was adamant that it did work. Here's a tweet from him saying that not only do all games run at 4K 60, even if the developer chooses to run their game at 30, Google Stadia will just go ahead and up it to 60 frames per second. They'll just do it anyway. That turned out not to be true. In fact, about a few weeks after launch, Google released a statement saying, it's up to developers if they want to run at 4K. The problem is that when you're pitching a $10 per month service as allowing you to access 4K 60 frames per second as one of the primary benefits, and you don't get it, it's not a good look. But let's say that did happen, and all games do run at 4K 60 frames per second. Only the Chromecast Ultra was capable of outputting at those frame rates and resolution, and in 5.1 surround. It wasn't until April 16th that Google Chrome on desktops and laptops got 5.1 surround sound, and it wasn't until the end of May that Google Chrome ended up getting 4K output, up to 4K output. They totally missed the mark on that one, especially when they're asking users to spend a monthly amount to get that access.
Stadia not only provides high-performing multiplayer experiences from player to player, but also allows developers to create new, gorgeous gaming environments. It is a raw demonstration of scale and power using the best of Stadia technology, where every piece of the environment in this multiplayer world is destructible using real-time rigid body physics. With Stream Connect, we're making it possible to realize split-screen multiplayer without any performance penalty. Here we have two players, one hunter on the ground and a supporting aerial player, set up in a standard split-screen view. Each of these screens is powered by a separate Stadia instance. But what would happen to squad-based games if developers could allow players to call up the views of their teammates on demand, or utilize any polygonal surface as a receiver for another player's video stream? We've shown you 3 views, but we can keep going. We can keep adding streams and shape how they're shown to the player, giving a designer not one, but many cameras into a scene.
For the first part, talking about kind of seamless multiplayer worlds, that part kind of remains to be seen because there really haven't been exclusive Stadia games that can live up to something like that. And the developers can't make a world that can work with the Stadia seamless open world and still work on PlayStation, Xbox, etc. It's just not that straightforward. There needs to be exclusive content for us to really see that kind of feature. But the second part of the Stream Connect, where you have different video feeds on screen so you can see other players, that exists in Ghost Recon Breakpoint. But I haven't found another example of where that is. I see potential in that feature. I can see whenever Call of Duty comes to Stadia, like Warzone, there they could put that kind of feature, but it only exists in one game from what I found so far.
Stadia offers instant access to play. Our platform vision for Stadia is to reduce the friction between getting excited about a game and playing a game. On Stadia, you just need to click on a YouTube video or link, and you can be playing your game instantly. Compare that to today, where gamers are all too familiar with things like this. With Stadia, this waiting game will be a thing of the past.
For the last point, I wanted to do something that Google did accomplish, and they accomplished this one. You can access your games instantly. And that brings us to our conclusion here. And it kind of brings also the question of how well did Google Stadia live up to its promises? And based on this chart that I kind of put together, where green means they lived up to the promise, yellow means it was iffy, and red means just really atrociously bad, it didn't look great. This is actually really disappointing to see, and it really helps put into context why the hype died down leading up to launch, and definitely in 2020, as just there wasn't a lot of momentum and a follow-through on some of the promises they had made. And hopefully, as the years go on, they're able to live up to those promises, because there were really great features that were announced, unique things that other consoles just can't do. So let's cross our fingers and hope it happens. And that's it for the first episode of The Grind, Stadia's Broken Promises. Next week is going to focus on the introduction of Stadia versus the introduction of other new platforms when they came out, Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox. And then the final episode is going to be the week after that, where we're going to discuss the future of Stadia and whether or not it has the potential to become a big player. Till then, you guys have a great one.